The desert air was sharp that morning, a biting mix of sand and gun oil. The kind of air soldiers never forget because it always carried the weight of blood and burnt steel. Private First Class Elena Ramirez sat cross-legged inside the crumbling shell of a building on the outskirts of Kandahar, her hands blackened from cleaning a rifle that looked like it belonged in a museum. It wasn't standard issue, wasn't even supposed to be there. An M24 long-barreled, scratched and beaten to hell. She had found it in a weapons cache the platoon had raided 2 nights earlier. The thing that caught her eye wasn't the rifle itself. It was the faint engraving under the chipped black paint, revealed as she scrubbed with an oily rag. A small insignia, a coiled serpent wrapped around a sword, etched with precise lines. She froze. Her father had told her stories about that insignia. Stories whispered in barracks and never written down. Ghost snakes, he had called them. A sniper detachment so precise, so feared, that the Taliban swore they weren't human. Officially the unit didn't exist. No patches, no records, just rumors. And yet here it was, staring back at her from a rifle covered in dust and blood. Before she could process it, a shadow fell across her shoulder. "Where the hell did you get that?" Colonel Harris's voice cut through the room like barbed wire. Ramirez snapped up to attention, her hand still gripping the rifle. Harris wasn't the kind of man who appeared without reason. He was a tall figure, hard lines carved into his face. Every word he spoke weighed with the authority of decades in combat. The colonel's gaze locked onto the insignia, and for the first time since Ramirez had been deployed, she saw something flicker in his expression: recognition. "That's not just a rifle," Harris said, his voice low. He stepped closer, his boots grinding against the rubble. "That belonged to legends." The room went quiet. Outside, the hum of Humvees and the chatter of soldiers faded into the background. Ramirez's squad mates, Cooper, a loudmouth from Texas, and Lee, quiet and meticulous, looked between the colonel and the rifle like they had stumbled onto something forbidden. "What do you mean, sir?" Ramirez asked, keeping her tone steady. Harris took a deep breath, then looked at the rest of the squad. "Clear the room. Now." Cooper opened his mouth to protest, but one glance from Harris shut him up. The men filed out, leaving Ramirez alone with the colonel. Harris crouched down until his eyes were level with hers. "That rifle doesn't leave your sight. Do you understand? Not the armory, not your squad mates. You keep it with you at all times." "Sir, with respect, it's just a rifle." His jaw tightened. "No, Ramirez. It's a promise. That weapon once belonged to a ghost snake sniper. They were trained to disappear into landscapes, to fire one bullet that could change the course of a battle. They didn't just kill, they shifted wars. And if this rifle resurfaced here now, someone wanted it found." Ramirez's stomach tightened. The war had already been chaos. Ambushes, IEDs, firefights that burned out villages in minutes. But this felt like something deeper, like a shadow stretching back before her time. "Why me, sir?" she asked. Harris looked her dead in the eye. "Because you found it. And now you're responsible for carrying what it means." That night, as the platoon set up perimeter defenses around their temporary forward operating base, Ramirez lay awake with the rifle beside her. The air was restless, wind howling through cracked walls, the distant thump of artillery echoing across the horizon. Cooper, lying on his cot, stared at the ceiling. "You're gonna tell me what the colonel said, right? 'Cause I'm about 2 seconds from exploding with curiosity." Ramirez hesitated, then shook her head. "You don't want to know." "Bullshit," Cooper muttered. "Anything that makes the old man sweat like that? I definitely want to know." Lee rolled over, his voice calm. "Leave her alone, Co-op. If Harris wanted us to know, he'd tell us." The conversation ended there, but Ramirez could feel their eyes on her, feel the weight of the rifle between her palms. It wasn't just steel anymore. It was a secret with teeth. 2 days later, the secret bit back. The platoon had been sent to sweep a valley riddled with abandoned compounds. Standard patrol. Or so they thought. The sun was merciless, baking the sand into glass. Ramirez marched with her squad along the ridge when the first shot rang out. A bullet cracked past Cooper's helmet, sending him sprawling behind a rock. "Sniper," he shouted. Chaos erupted. The soldiers scattered, diving for cover as rounds chewed into the dirt around them. Harris barked orders over the comms, his voice steady even under fire. "Pinpoint the shooter. Suppressive fire East Ridge." Ramirez's heart hammered. She scanned the hills, but the enemy was invisible. That's when her eyes fell on the M24 slung across her chest. Her hands moved before her brain caught up. She dropped prone, snapped open the bipod, and lined the scope toward the glint of glass half a mile away. The rifle felt different, almost alive, the recoil a whisper instead of a shove. She squeezed the trigger. One shot. Silence. Then in the distance, a body slumped from a ridge, tumbling into the dust. The ambush stopped as suddenly as it began. Whoever had been coordinating the attack was gone, and the insurgents scattered like ants. Ramirez lay still, the echo of the shot ringing in her bones. The rest of the squad regrouped, some cursing, some laughing nervously. Harris walked straight to her, eyes fixed on the smoking barrel of the M24. "That was a ghost snake shot," he said quietly. Ramirez swallowed hard. "It was just training, sir." "No," Harris said, shaking his head. "That was instinct. An instinct like that doesn't come from training alone." That night, the colonel called a meeting in the command tent. Only a handful of officers and Ramirez were present. Maps were spread across the table, dotted with red circles. "This valley isn't random," Harris said, tapping one of the circles. "Intel suggests there's a new insurgent commander operating here. They call him Qadir al-Suri. Ex-Special Forces. He's been building something bigger than roadside bombs. Whoever we killed today wasn't just a sniper. He was guarding Qadir's next move." The room tensed. Qadir's name was whispered across Afghanistan like a curse. "And you think this ties back to the rifle?" one of the captains asked. Harris's gaze flicked to Ramirez. "I don't believe in coincidences. That weapon showing up here now in this valley, it's a message. And Private Ramirez is the one who answered it." Ramirez felt every eye in the room on her. She wanted to shrink into the canvas walls, but Harris's words pinned her in place. "You're assigning me to what, sir?" she asked, her voice thin. Harris leaned forward, his expression grim. "You're going to hunt Qadir. With that rifle. Just like the ghost snakes would have done." The days that followed blurred into adrenaline and dust. Ramirez trained harder than ever, spending hours with the M24, learning its quirks, its history. Cooper tried to joke, "Guess you're a legend now, Ramirez," but she could see the unease behind his smile. Lee said nothing, but his quiet presence told her he trusted her, even if he didn't understand. Their first mission came sooner than expected. Drone footage spotted Qadir's convoy moving through the valley under heavy guard. The platoon was ordered to intercept. Harris pulled Ramirez aside before they rolled out. "This isn't just about pulling a trigger," he told her. "This is about changing the story. Every soldier out there thinks Qadir can't be touched. You prove them wrong and you break his hold on this region." Ramirez nodded, gripping the rifle tight. But inside, doubt clawed at her. She was just a private. Just a soldier trying to make it home. What if she missed? What if she wasn't cut out to carry the legacy of ghosts? The convoy came into sight near dusk. Armored trucks kicking up plumes of dust, armed fighters bristling from every angle. Ramirez lay belly down on a ridge, her scope fixed on the lead vehicle. Her breathing slowed. The world shrank to the circle of glass. Through the crosshairs she spotted him, Qadir. Broad shoulders, thick beard, eyes scanning the horizon like he knew death was watching. Ramirez's finger tightened on the trigger. Then, in the corner of her scope, she caught something else. A child, no more than 12, clinging to the side of the truck, eyes wide with terror. Her chest clenched. The shot was clean. One squeeze and Qadir would fall. But the boy was inches away. Her mind screamed. "Pull it. Don't pull it." Every second was a lifetime. "Take the shot." Harris's voice crackled in her earpiece. Ramirez's breath hitched. The crosshairs hovered. And then the convoy shifted, the trucks accelerating, dust swallowing the target. The chance was gone. She lowered the rifle, trembling. Over comms, Harris's voice was sharp. "Why didn't you fire?" Ramirez whispered, "There was a kid, sir." Silence. Then finally, "Understood. We regroup. Now." Back at base, the atmosphere was heavy. Some soldiers looked at Ramirez with respect. Others with doubt. Cooper tried to lighten it. Hell, better a missed shot than turning a kid into collateral. But even he knew the weight of what had been lost. Harris, though, said nothing. Not a word that night. But the next morning he came to Ramirez's cot, his face unreadable. He held out a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" she asked. "Coordinates," Harris said. "The ghost snakes used to call it a hunting ground. It's where their insignia first appeared, decades ago. You want to understand that rifle? You'll find your answers there." Ramirez unfolded the paper, her pulse quickening as she read the numbers. And just like that, her war was no longer about patrols and firefights. It was about stepping into the shadows of ghosts, armed with nothing but a rifle and the weight of choices that could change everything. The desert stretched out forever, a landscape of broken ridges and shadows that never gave answers. Private First Class Elena Ramirez sat cramped in the back of the Humvee, the old M24 resting across her lap. The vehicle jolted over rocks, dust swirling inside through the open hatch, sticking to her sweat-soaked uniform. She kept her eyes on the folded paper Harris had given her. The coordinates burned in her mind, a mystery that weighed heavier with every mile. Across from her, Cooper was cleaning his M4 with exaggerated care, humming a country song off-key. Lee sat in silence, staring out the window as if the emptiness outside held secrets only he could see. Finally Cooper spoke. "So, where exactly are we going? Because hunting ground doesn't sound like a five-star vacation spot." Ramirez hesitated, then said, "It's an old ghost snake site. Colonel thinks there's something there we need." Cooper's eyebrows shot up. "Ghost snakes? As in the sniper boogeymen? The ones who supposedly shot insurgents from 2 miles away? The ones who didn't exist?" "They existed," Lee said quietly. Cooper laughed. "Sure, and Santa Claus exists too." He pointed at the rifle. "That thing's messing with your head, Ramirez. Just a weapon. Nothing more." Ramirez ran a finger over the engraved insignia. "Tell that to the colonel." The convoy reached the coordinates by dusk. The sun bled into the horizon, staining the desert red. What awaited them wasn't a base or even ruins, just a narrow canyon choked with jagged rocks. The kind of place you'd never walk into without expecting trouble. The platoon dismounted. Harris gathered them in a tight circle, his face drawn in the fading light. "This canyon was a ghost snake nest during the early days of the war," he said. "Intel suggests Kadir might be using it now. Ramirez, you're on point with the M24. The rest of us provide overwatch." Cooper muttered under his breath, "Great. Walk into the sniper graveyard. What could possibly go wrong?" They moved in slowly, boots crunching on gravel. The canyon walls loomed high on either side, casting long shadows. Every echo of their movement felt like it belonged to someone else. Halfway through, Ramirez froze. Her scope caught something carved into the rock, the serpent and sword insignia, faint but unmistakable. "Ghost snake mark," she whispered into comms. Harris's reply was immediate. "Stay sharp." They left those as warnings. Suddenly a shot cracked. A bullet sparked off the rock inches from Cooper's head. The canyon erupted in chaos, gunfire raining down from the cliffs. "Ambush!" Lee shouted, dragging Cooper into cover. Ramirez dropped prone, the M24 kicking into her shoulder as she scanned the ridge. The enemy was well hidden, muzzle flashes flickering like fireflies. She picked one, fired, and watched a fighter crumple. Then another. But for every shot she took, 3 more came back. Harris barked into the comms, "They knew we'd come here. Pull back. Pull back." But retreat wasn't easy. The canyon was a kill box, every exit sealed by fire. Ramirez's heart pounded. If they stayed, they'd be wiped out. If they ran, they'd be cut down. Her scope swept higher, and that's when she saw it, a glint on the opposite ridge. Not a fighter's rifle. A scope. A sniper. Watching her. The world narrowed to that single reflection. Ramirez exhaled, steadied her crosshairs and squeezed. The shot echoed. The glint vanished. The return fire faltered. The colonel seized the opening. "Go, go, go." The platoon surged forward, sprinting through the canyon as bullets chased them. Dust filled Ramirez's lungs, her legs burning, but she kept the rifle close, firing whenever she could. By the time they stumbled out into the open desert, 2 men were wounded, 1 badly. Medics scrambled, applying tourniquets and bandages. The rest of the soldiers collapsed into cover, gasping for air. Harris stood, surveying the canyon. His jaw was tight, but his voice steady. "We're not turning back. Not now." That night, they set up camp a mile from the canyon. The wounded were stabilized, though one, Private Garrison, was barely hanging on. Cooper tried to keep spirits up, cracking jokes about sniper ghosts throwing rocks at them, but no one laughed. Ramirez sat apart from the others, the M24 across her knees. She couldn't shake the image of the sniper watching her, as if daring her to fire. It hadn't been just another insurgent. That shot had been deliberate, personal. Harris approached, lowering himself beside her. "You saw him, didn't you?" Ramirez nodded. "He was waiting for me." "Kadir's sniper," Harris said quietly. "Ex-special forces like him. They say he trained under Russian instructors, fought in Chechnya. Cold as ice. If he's here, it means Kadir is near." Ramirez swallowed. "Then why aren't we pulling out? We barely made it through." "Because retreat tells him we're scared," Harris said. His eyes flicked to the rifle. "You put him on his heels. Today. You won't forget that. Tomorrow you finish it. The weight of his words pressed down on her chest. Finish it. Like she had a choice. The next morning they moved at dawn. The canyon was silent now, too silent. No gunfire, no movement, just the wind whispering through the rocks. Harris split the platoon into fire teams, sending Ramirez with Cooper and Lee up the eastern ridge. They climbed slowly, rifles raised, every shadow a threat. At the top, the world opened into a plateau overlooking the valley. And there, half hidden behind a boulder, was a sniper's nest. Empty. Ramirez crouched, scanning the ground. Spent casings. A torn cloth. And carved into the rock, fresh and sharp, the serpent and sword insignia. Her blood ran cold. He's taunting us, she muttered. Cooper frowned. What kind of psycho leaves calling cards in the middle of a war zone? The kind who wants me to know he's watching, Ramirez said. Suddenly the crack of a rifle split the air. Lee went down, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Contact. Cooper screamed, dragging Lee into cover. Ramirez dropped behind the boulder, heart racing. She raised the M24, scanning the cliffs opposite. There, just a flash of movement, a silhouette blending perfectly into the rocks. She aimed, exhaled, pulled the trigger. The shot slammed into stone. The silhouette vanished. A voice echoed faintly across the canyon, distorted but clear. Arabic, but Ramirez understood the meaning. You missed. Her stomach twisted. He wasn't just hunting them. He was hunting her. The firefight raged for hours. The sniper's rounds were precise, calculated, forcing the platoon into constant motion. Every time Ramirez tried to line up a shot, he slipped away like smoke. By midday the heat was unbearable, the wounded piling up. Harris ordered a fallback to a defensible ridge, setting up a perimeter. The men were exhausted, nerves frayed. Cooper slammed his helmet against a rock. This is suicide. We're chasing a damn ghost. Ramirez didn't argue. Because deep down she feared he was right. That night, while the others rested, she sat awake with the M24, staring into the darkness. The sniper was still out there. Watching. Waiting. And she couldn't shake the feeling that the rifle in her hands, the ghost snake relic, was the reason he hadn't finished them yet. As if this was a duel. And only one of them was meant to walk away. The next day brought blood. At dawn, Kadir's forces struck. RPGs slammed into the ridge, shaking the earth. Machine gun fire lit up the camp. The platoon scrambled, returning fire, but they were outnumbered 3-1. Ramirez fired shot after shot, dropping targets, but the enemy kept coming. Smoke burned her lungs, sand stung her eyes, but she didn't stop. Then she saw him. Through the chaos, the sniper appeared on a distant ridge, his rifle gleaming in the sun. Come. So. His scope fixed on her. Time slowed. Ramirez's heart pounded. She raised the M24, crosshairs locking on his chest. This was it. Her finger tightened. But at the last second he lowered his rifle. He tilted his head, almost like a nod, then vanished into the dust. And in that moment of hesitation the world exploded. A mortar slammed into the ridge. Ramirez was thrown to the ground, ears ringing, body aching. She crawled through the smoke, searching for her squad. Cooper was alive, dragging Lee by his vest. Harris was shouting orders, blood streaking down his face. The platoon was in pieces, scattering under the relentless assault. Ramirez gripped the M24, forcing herself to her feet. Her war wasn't about survival anymore. It was about answers. About why the sniper had spared her. About what the rifle meant. Because one thing was certain. This was no longer just a mission. It was personal. By nightfall, the survivors regrouped miles away, battered and broken. Harris stood before them, his voice hoarse but firm. We lost ground today. But this fight isn't over. Kadir wants us gone. We're going to show him we're not afraid. He turned to Ramirez. And you're going to finish what the ghost snake started. Ramirez stared at the rifle in her hands, the insignia glowing faintly in the firelight. And for the first time she wondered if carrying it was a choice, or a curse. The desert had a way of making time meaningless. Days blurred into one another, stitched together with gunfire, exhaustion, and the constant, invisible presence of an enemy that never slept. Private First Class Elena Ramirez sat with her squad around a dim fire, the embers barely visible against the black horizon. The M24 lay across her lap like a coiled predator. She hadn't let it out of her sight since Kandahar. Lee was alive, though pale, his shoulder wrapped in bloodied bandages. Cooper sat next to him, chewing jerky like he could chew the fear out of his gut. Colonel Harris paced behind them, maps clutched in his weathered hands, his eyes scanning the terrain beyond the flames. It had been 3 days since Kadir's ambush. 3 days of constant skirmishes, retreat, and regrouping. And still the sniper was out there. Watching. Waiting. "Sir," Ramirez said, finally breaking the silence. "We can't keep running from him. We need to hunt him before he bleeds us out." Harris stopped pacing. His gaze settled on her, sharp and heavy. "You think you can outhunt a man who's been killing since before you joined the army?" Ramirez clenched her fists. "He's not invincible. He let me live. That means something." Cooper snorted. "Yeah, it means he's playing with his food." Lee's voice, quiet but firm, cut in. "Or it means he wants a duel." The words hung in the air. Harris stared at the fire, then finally nodded. "He's right. This isn't about the platoon anymore. It's about you, Ramirez. He's locked onto you." Ramirez's pulse hammered. She had known it deep down since the canyon. The sniper wasn't just killing at random. He was testing her. Waiting for her to step fully into his crosshairs. "Then let's give him what he wants," she said. At dawn, the platoon moved to set the trap. Harris called it Operation Glass Fong. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Use Ramirez as bait. They would spread a rumor through local channels that a high-value American sniper was operating near the Tangi Valley. Word traveled fast in Afghanistan, especially when they wanted it to. If Kadir's sniper took the bait, Ramirez would lead him into a controlled kill zone where the platoon would provide overwatch. Cooper didn't like it. "So we dangle Ramirez out in the open and hope the bogeyman bites? That's not a plan, that's suicide." "It's war," Harris snapped. "And war doesn't give us clean choices." Ramirez said nothing. She just kept running her hands over the M24, oiling every screw, cleaning every groove. She could feel the rifle's weight in her bones now. It was more than steel, it was history. That night she didn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the desert breathe, the stars sharp above her, the silence broken only by the occasional pop of distant gunfire. And somewhere out there, in that vast darkness, another sniper lay awake too, perhaps staring at the same stars. The duel began the next morning. Ramirez moved out alone, her squad hidden in the ridges behind her. The M24 was steady in her hands, her eyes scanning every rock, every shadow. She moved like a ghost herself, low and deliberate. Hours passed. Nothing. Just the desert stretching endless and empty. Then the faintest sound, a pebble skittering down a slope. Ramirez froze. Her scope swept the ridge. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then, there. A flicker of cloth against stone. The faint reflection of glass. Her chest tightened. He was here. She dropped into prone, lined up her scope, and fired. The shot echoed, kicking dust into the air. But her target was already gone. A round cracked past her ear, slamming into the dirt inches from her face. She rolled, adrenaline flooding her veins, and crawled into cover. The duel was on. For the next 2 hours, it was chess in the dust. She'd fire, he'd vanish. He'd fire, she'd scramble. Every shot was a message. "I see you. I know you." The platoon tried to provide overwatch, but the sniper was too good. He moved like smoke, never staying in one place long enough for them to pin him down. At one point, a bullet shattered the rock an inch from Cooper's scope, forcing him to duck. "He's toying with us," Cooper shouted over comms. "No," Ramirez whispered, sweat dripping into her eyes. "He's toying with me." Finally, near dusk, she spotted him. Through her scope, across the valley he stood. Not hiding. Not moving. Just standing in the open, his rifle lowered. It was insane. He was giving her a perfect shot. Her finger tightened on the trigger. But something held her back. The way he stood, it wasn't arrogance. It was invitation. A duel. Face to face. No tricks, no cover. Just one shot to decide it. Ramirez's throat went dry. Slowly, she rose from her position, stepping into the open. Harris's voice exploded over comms. "Ramirez, what the hell are you doing? Stay in cover." She ignored him. The desert was silent except for the wind. The sniper lifted his rifle. So did she. 2 soldiers. 2 rifles. One moment. The world shrank to the crosshairs. Ramirez exhaled, steady. Her finger moved. The shot cracked. Dust exploded around her. Her body jerked, but it wasn't pain. She was still standing. Across the valley the sniper staggered. A bloom of red spread across his chest. He fell backward, his rifle clattering against the rocks. Ramirez's breath came in ragged gasps. Her knees nearly buckled. She had won. But as the platoon converged on her, as Harris barked orders to secure the valley, She couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Because when they reached the body, the sniper's face was already cold, his eyes open to the sky. And carved into his rifle stock, fresh and sharp, was the serpent and sword insignia. That night, the platoon gathered in silence. No cheers, no laughter. Just exhaustion. Cooper finally broke it. "Well, you killed the bastard. That's good news, right?" Ramirez stared into the fire. "Then why doesn't it feel like it?" Lee, his voice quiet, said, "Because sometimes the fight doesn't end when the body drops." Harris approached, carrying the fallen sniper's rifle. He set it next to the M24, the two weapons lying side by side. Twins scarred by war. "They weren't enemies," Harris said, his voice low. "They were part of the same story. And now, Ramirez, so are you." Ramirez looked at the two rifles, the twin insignias gleaming in the firelight. And for the first time she realized what scared her most. The sniper hadn't spared her before because he was arrogant. He'd spared her because he knew she carried the ghost snake's legacy. And now, whether she wanted it or not, that legacy was hers. At dawn, a drone buzzed overhead relaying new intel. Harris called the platoon together. His expression was grim. "Kadir isn't retreating. He's moving fast, too fast. That duel was never about killing Ramirez. It was about buying time. While we were locked in that valley, he's been moving weapons." He pointed to the map, his finger jabbing at a marked village near the border. "He's got something big. And if he gets it across the line, we'll never touch him again." Ramirez felt the weight of the M24 in her hands. Her chest tightened. The sniper duel had been personal. But now the war was back. And Kadir was still out there. The night over Karengal Valley was suffocating. No moon, no stars, just the thick black sky pressing down like a lid over a boiling pot. The soldiers of Outpost Razorback could feel it in their bones. Something was coming. You didn't need intelligence reports to tell you that. The silence itself had weight. Staff Sergeant Mason sat cross-legged against a sandbag wall, helmet tipped back, M4 resting across his lap. He had been out here too long not to notice the change. Every cricket, every distant goat bell, every accidental flicker of a fire in the mountainside villages, all gone. The enemy had stolen the night and Mason hated it. "Quiet as a churchyard," muttered Specialist Ramirez, cleaning his M249 light machine gun by Redland's flashlight. His young face looked pale under the glow. "I don't like it." "No one does," Mason replied flatly, but his eyes kept scanning the ridgeline. Inside the command tent, Captain Harris studied a wall of maps, grease pencil lines tracking patrol routes, supply convoys and radio intercepts. The colonel's voice still echoed in his head from that afternoon briefing. "You're sitting on a hornet's nest. They're planning something big. Don't let them dictate the fight." The colonel had left them with more than words. He'd handed Harris a sealed folder marked Foxtrot Echo, Eyes Only. Inside was a declassified dossier, fragments of intercepted chatter, and, most unsettling, a grainy photograph. The picture showed a group of insurgents clustered around a flag, but stitched into the fabric of one fighter's vest was the same insignia carved into that old M24 rifle. Harris hadn't shared that detail with the platoon. They had enough to worry about. The first mortars. The first blast came at 0020 hours. A sharp whistle cut the night, then a thunderclap. The ground buckled, dirt showering down over the camp. Alarms shrieked. Soldiers scrambled out of bunks, boots half-laced, weapons clutched. "Incoming! Incoming!" Another mortar screamed down, this one landing dangerously close to the fuel bladder. Flames roared skyward, painting the valley in hellish orange. "Get on the guns! Get on the damn guns!" Mason shouted, dragging Ramirez toward the nearest machine gun nest. Tracer rounds split the darkness. The ridgeline lit up with muzzle flashes. The Taliban had the high ground and they were using it mercilessly. RPGs hammered the outpost walls, each impact shaking Razorback like a ship in a storm. Corporal Jennings, manning the .50 cal, screamed over the gunfire, "They're everywhere! South Ridge, North Ridge. Jesus, they've boxed us in." Harris grabbed the radio. "Razorback to Eagle 6. We are under heavy contact, multiple directions, estimate 200 fighters. We need immediate fire support, over." Static. Then the calm, detached voice of an Air Force controller. "Razorback stand by. CS inbound, 15 minutes out. Hold your ground. 15 minutes. A lifetime under this storm." Mason's gamble. Pinned behind a shattered wall, Mason spotted the problem. Enemy fighters were using a collapsed goat trail on the west slope, funneling straight down toward the outpost's weakest corner. If they reached the wire, Razorback would be overrun. He didn't wait for orders. Ramirez, Jennings, you're with me. We cut them off now or we're done. They sprinted through the chaos, bullets snapping overhead. One round clipped Jennings' helmet, spinning him around. He stumbled, dazed, but Mason yanked him up by the collar. At the western trench they set up. Ramirez's saw chattered, mowing down the lead insurgents. Jennings swung his M4 with mechanical precision despite his rattled state. Mason picked targets with cold efficiency, every shot buying seconds. But the enemy kept coming, bodies silhouetted in the firelight. Mason knew they couldn't hold forever. Inside the Tiosi. Meanwhile, Harris pored over the map under flickering lantern light. The insurgents weren't just attacking randomly, they were pushing along old Soviet trench lines, converging on one exact grid. Harris froze. That grid matched the coordinates in the colonel's sealed dossier. They're not here to wipe us out, he realized. They're here to retrieve something. His blood went cold. Whatever the insignia meant, whatever ghost of a war had been buried in these mountains, the enemy wanted it badly enough to throw hundreds of men into the fire. He grabbed the radio again. Eagle 6, be advised, this is not a standard assault. I say again, this is targeted. They're moving toward an objective on my grid. We cannot let them breach. Over. The colonel's voice crackled back, rough and urgent. Understood, Captain. Hold them at all costs. Reinforcements are en route, ETA 30 minutes. Do not let them reach that position. That's an order. Breaking point. By 00:45 hours, Razorback was a furnace of noise and flame. Wounded men filled the medic's tent, their screams blending with the thunder of artillery. Ammunition was running low. Ramirez's saw overheated, the barrel glowing red. She's done. I'm dry, he yelled, switching to his sidearm. Jennings went down with a leg wound, blood soaking his fatigues. Mason dragged him into cover, then leaned into his radio. Harris, we're losing the west flank. If they push through, we're screwed. Hold, Mason. Air support is 2 mics out. Just hold. Mason peeked over the sandbags, saw the tide of fighters pouring closer and muttered, 2 minutes is a lifetime out here. He made a decision. Grabbing Jennings' M4, he vaulted the trench and charged down the slope. Ramirez screamed after him, but Mason didn't stop. He cut through the insurgent vanguard like a madman, firing, reloading, firing again. For a moment the enemy faltered. One man against many, yet unstoppable. But then a crack rang out. Mason dropped to one knee, clutching his shoulder, blood spraying. Still he fired, teeth bared in defiance. The sky answers. The roar came like judgment from the heavens. An A-10 thundered low, cannon spitting fire. The hillside erupted as if the mountain itself had detonated. Insurgents scattered, torn apart by 30mm rounds. The airstrike strafed again and again, until the ridges fell silent but for the ringing in the soldiers' ears. Smoke and dust rolled over Razorback, hiding the dead. Cheers erupted, ragged but alive. They had survived, for now. Aftermath. Dawn revealed the cost. 17 Americans dead, dozens wounded. Mason lay in the medic's tent, pale but conscious, his shoulder wrapped tight. Jennings had lost too much blood but hung on. Ramirez sat beside him, exhausted, muttering prayers. Captain Harris walked the perimeter, boots crunching over spent casings. He paused at the western trench where Mason had made his stand. The ground was littered with bodies, both enemy and American. And there, half buried in the dirt, he saw it. A fragment of cloth, charred but still visible. The same insignia. The mark of whatever legend the colonel feared. Harris pocketed it silently. The colonel returns. Hours later, the colonel himself arrived with reinforcements. He walked Razorback like a man revisiting a grave, his jaw tight. He stopped at Harris. You held, he said simply. Barely, Harris replied. But they weren't just trying to wipe us out. They wanted something here. And we both know what. The colonel's eyes flicked to Harris's pocket, as if he could see through the fabric. That's above your clearance, Captain. With respect, sir, Harris said coldly, my men died for it. I need to know. The colonel didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward the mountains where smoke still curled from the ridges. His silence said more than words ever could. The promise. That night, Harris sat beside Mason's cot. The sergeant was awake, pain dulled by morphine. You saved this outpost, Harris said. Didn't save all of them, Mason rasped. His eyes were haunted. 17 gone, Cap. For what? Harris hesitated, then pulled the insignia fragment from his pocket. Mason stared at it, recognition flickering in his eyes. I've seen that before, Mason whispered. Back in training. Old sniper manuals, guys used to joke it was cursed. Said it belonged to some unit that wasn't supposed to exist. Harris frowned. What unit? Mason closed his eyes, voice fading. They called themselves Ghost Reapers. Sleep took him before he could say more. Closing scene. Outside, the valley seemed calm again, but Harris knew better. The attack hadn't been the end. It had been a test, a probing strike. Whatever was buried in these hills, whatever the insignia meant, the enemy would be back for it. And next time Razorback might not survive. Harris looked at the mountains, his jaw tightening. We're not just fighting a war, he muttered. We're guarding a secret. The wind carried the smell of smoke and blood, and with it, the unshakable sense that this was only the beginning. The Karengal Valley never really slept. Even in daylight, silence wasn't safety, it was a mask. By mid-morning, the smoke of the previous night's battle had lifted, but the air was heavy with grief. Rows of body bags waited for medevac. Soldiers carried them out with the quiet reverence of men too exhausted to cry anymore. Captain Harris stood at the edge of the makeshift landing zone, helmet tucked under his arm, face streaked with dirt and sleeplessness. Every loss weighed on him. He could feel the blood of 17 soldiers on his hands. A pair of Black Hawks thundered down, rotors kicking up dust. From the first bird stepped Colonel Trent, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. His presence cut through the camp like a blade. "Captain," he said curtly, striding forward. "Walk with me." Harris fell into step, heart pounding. He knew what this was about, the insignia fragment the secret Mason had whispered through cracked lips. They stopped in the command tent. Trent shut the flap behind them. His voice dropped low as if the canvas walls had ears. "You saw it, didn't you? The mark." Harris reached into his pocket, pulled out the cloth and laid it on the map table. The faded insignia stared back at them, a reaper's scythe crossed with a long rifle. "Yes," Harris said. "And Mason, he said he'd heard of it. Ghost Reapers." "What the hell does it mean, sir?" Trent's jaw flexed. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he leaned forward, hands braced on the table. The Ghost Reapers were real. Officially they didn't exist. A sniper detachment in the late 80s, operating off the books during the Soviet-Afghan War. Men trained to vanish into mountains, to hunt targets no one else could reach. They were ghosts because they left nothing behind. Reapers because no one who saw them walked away. Harris felt the air thicken. And what happened to them? They went rogue. Trent's voice was grim. Half the unit vanished during a classified op in these very valleys. Some say they were killed, others that they defected, selling their skills to whoever paid. We buried the files. Too dangerous, too shameful. But clearly not everything stayed buried. Harris looked down at the insignia. So last night, the enemy was after more than just an outpost. They were after whatever the Reapers left behind. Trent nodded. Weapons caches. Intel. Maybe even surviving members. We don't know. But one thing is certain, they'll come again. And if they get their hands on Reaper tech or training manuals, this war gets uglier than you can imagine. Orders. By noon, Razorback was buzzing with new energy. Reinforcements had arrived, medevac had cleared the worst casualties, and now the colonel was laying out a plan. Harris gathered his squad leaders around the map. "We're going hunting," Trent said, pointing to a grid deep in the valley. "Intel suggests a hidden cache tied to the Reapers. That's what the enemy's after. We find it first, destroy it if necessary. Harris, your platoon will lead. You'll have Mason's fire team plus additional attachments. Expect heavy resistance." Mason, still bandaged but stubbornly upright, limped into the briefing. Harris frowned. "You shouldn't even be on your feet." Mason grinned through the pain. "Sir, if this is about the Reapers, you're gonna need me. I've read every scrap about them since basic. Call it obsession, call it fate. But I'm not sitting this one out." Harris studied him, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But you stay behind me." "That's an order." Ramirez smirked. "Good luck making him listen to that, Cap." The room laughed, short, nervous laughter but enough to cut the tension. Into the valley. At dusk, 2 squads moved out, 30 men in all, slipping into the jagged terrain beyond Razorback. The valley was a labyrinth of ridges, ravines, and goat trails. Every shadow felt like a pair of eyes. Mason hiked with his rifle slung, sweat soaking his bandages. Ramirez walked beside him, whispering, "You really think we'll find some lost sniper cult out here?" Mason's eyes scanned the slopes. "I don't know what we'll find. But those guys were legends. If even a piece of their kit survived, it's worth killing for. That's why the Taliban are throwing themselves at us." Harris, up front, signaled halt. The column froze. He crouched, studying the ground. The dirt was churned with fresh boot prints, too organized for shepherds. He raised a fist, contact likely. They moved slower after that, rifles raised, breaths shallow. The cave. Hours later they reached the grid. It wasn't much, just a cliff face half hidden by thorn bushes. But Mason noticed the unnatural shape of a narrow fissure. He pushed aside the brush and found a gap leading into darkness. "Here," he whispered. Harris called for silence, then ordered 2 men forward with flashlights. The beams cut into the black, revealing rough-hewn walls, a tunnel descending. "Ramirez, Mason, Jennings, you're with me," Harris ordered. "The rest secure the perimeter." Inside, the cave smelled of damp stone and old iron. Their boots echoed too loudly. Deeper in, the tunnel opened into a chamber. The beams of light swept across crates stacked like tombstones. Soviet markings. Some rotted, some intact. And on one, carved into the wood, was the Reaper insignia. "Holy shit," Ramirez breathed. Mason stepped closer, hand trembling as he touched the faded mark. They were here. Harris pried open a crate. Inside lay rifles wrapped in oilcloth, scopes gleaming even after decades. Another crate held notebooks, logbooks of kills, diagrams of tactics. Priceless to any insurgency. "Bag what we can carry. The rest we'll blow," Harris ordered. That's when the gunfire erupted outside. Ambush. Shouts, AK-47 chatter, grenades exploding. The perimeter was under full assault. Harris swore, slamming his radio. "All units hold. We're coming out." They scrambled back through the tunnel, dragging a crate each. As they burst into the open, chaos engulfed them. Insurgents swarmed from the tree-line, muzzle flashes lighting the night. "Down. Get to cover." Harris shouted, firing controlled bursts. Ramirez laid down suppressive fire, yelling obscenities as he cut down a charging fighter. Mason dropped to one knee, calm despite the madness, his borrowed sniper rifle cracking like thunder. Every shot found its mark. But they were outnumbered 3-1. The enemy had waited, shadowing them until the cache was found. Now both sides fought not just for survival but for the Reaper's legacy. Harris's decision. Pinned behind a boulder, Harris knew they couldn't hold. Worse, he realized the Taliban's objective wasn't to wipe them out, it was to seize the crates. If even one got through, the consequences would be catastrophic. He made a snap decision. "Ramirez, Mason, set charges in the cave. Everything goes, everything." Mason balked. "Sir, we could learn from this. Use it against them. And hand it over if we fall? Not a chance. Blow it." Mason's jaw clenched, but he obeyed, sprinting back into the cave with Ramirez. Harris rallied the others, holding the line by sheer force of will. Bullets sparked against stone. Jennings went down screaming, shrapnel in his side. Harris dragged him behind cover, hands slick with blood. "Mason. Now." Harris bellowed into the radio. "Fire in the mountain." The explosion was deafening. The cave mouth belched fire, rock collapsing inward. The shockwave ripped through the battlefield, throwing fighters from their feet. When the dust cleared, the entrance was sealed, the Reaper cache buried forever. The enemy faltered, morale broken. Harris seized the chance. Push them back." The Americans surged, fury in their rifles. The Taliban scattered into the dark, leaving bodies behind. When the shooting finally stopped, the valley was silent again, except for the moans of the wounded. Aftermath. At dawn, Razorback received them back like survivors of a shipwreck. Jennings was rushed to surgery. Mason sat outside the medic's tent, face blank, hands still shaking from the detonation. Ramirez dropped beside him. "Hell of a night." Mason didn't answer. He kept staring at the mountains, haunted. Harris found him there. "You did good, Sergeant. You saved lives." Mason shook his head. "We buried history out there. Men who gave everything to be legends, and now they're just dust. We erased them." Harris laid a hand on his shoulder. "We saved the living. That's all that matters." But Mason didn't look convinced. Deep inside he wondered if something should stay buried, or if ghosts had a way of clawing back to the surface. Closing scene. That night, as the camp settled into uneasy silence, Harris spread out the map again. His eyes fell on the sealed cave coordinates, now marked with a red X. But something nagged at him. The notebooks they'd recovered, just 2 small volumes, were filled with codes and symbols. Not everything had been destroyed. Not yet. Outside, the mountains loomed, endless and patient. Harris whispered to himself. This war isn't just about land or politics anymore. It's about ghosts. And somewhere in the darkness, far beyond Razorback's wire, A lone figure watched the outpost through a scope, his vest stitched with the insignia of the Reapers. The legend wasn't dead. It was hunting again. The night after the cave mission, Outpost Razorback lay under an uneasy quiet. No mortars, no gunfire, no Taliban probes against the wire. For soldiers used to constant harassment, the silence was worse than the sound of war. It meant something was brewing. Captain Harris sat inside the command tent, staring at the two small notebooks they had managed to salvage before Mason and Ramirez blew the Reaper cache. They looked ordinary, faded covers, brittle pages, but Harris could feel the weight of them. The Ghost Reapers had left their mark in more ways than one. Mason limped into the tent, his shoulders still raw from the last firefight. "Sir, you wanted me?" Harris slid one of the notebooks across the table. "You're the one obsessed with these Reaper myths. Tell me what you see." Mason flipped it open. Inside were rows of coded entries, numbers, symbols, strange marks sketched beside kill tallies. His brow furrowed as he turned the pages. "This isn't just a log," he muttered. "These are coordinates. Grids. Patterns. Whoever wrote this was tracking something, or someone." "Can you read it?" Harris asked. Mason hesitated. "Not all of it. But some of these symbols I've seen before. Old sniper manuals, training guides, things the brass tried to scrub. The Reapers had their own code." "Figure it out," Harris ordered. "Because I've got a bad feeling last night wasn't the end. It was just round one." Ghosts on the wire. At 0200 the silence broke. The forward observation post radioed in a whisper. "Movement on the ridge. Just one figure. Not Taliban, gear looks different." Harris snapped awake. "One figure? Alone?" No one walked those ridges alone unless they were insane, or deadly. He grabbed his NVGs, climbed the guard tower, and peered through the green glow. Sure enough, a lone silhouette stood on the high ridge overlooking Razorback. Not moving. Not hiding. Just watching. Then, as if sensing the gaze, the figure raised a hand, slow, deliberate, and tapped two fingers against the side of his helmet in a mock salute. Before anyone could react, he melted back into the rocks. Mason's stomach sank when he heard. That wasn't a farmer. That was a message. "What kind of message?" Ramirez asked, pale. Mason looked out at the ridge. "That the Ghost Reapers aren't history. They're here." The colonel's call. At dawn, Harris called it in. Colonel Trent's face appeared on the video feed, more lined than usual. "One man." Trent repeated. "Describe him." "Couldn't see details," Harris admitted. "But he was disciplined." "Bull. That wasn't a Taliban grunt. That was professional." Trent was silent a moment, then said, "Captain, listen carefully. If even one Reaper survived and went native, he'd be a nightmare. Those men were trained to live like shadows. To kill without being seen. One of them could run circles around a battalion in terrain like this." Mason stepped into the frame. "Sir, are you saying we're up against a Reaper? A real one?" Trent's eyes flicked toward him, then back to Harris. "Your orders are to confirm, not engage. Track him if you can. But don't underestimate him. If it is a survivor, you'll be walking into the wolf's den." The feed cut. Following the code. Back in the barracks, Mason spread the notebooks on his cot. Ramirez leaned over his shoulder, squinting. "Looks like chicken scratch to me." "It's a cipher," Mason said, tracing his finger over the pages. "See these numbers? They're not random, they match grid coordinates we've patrolled before. But look at this symbol beside them. It's the same one carved into the cave crates. It means cache." "You're saying there's more?" Ramirez asked. Mason nodded. "Lots more. The cave wasn't the only stash. And whoever that was last night, he's protecting them. Or baiting us to find them." Ramirez gave a low whistle. "So what's the plan?" "We chase a ghost through the valley until he decides to put a bullet in us." Mason shut the notebook, jaw set. "The plan is we don't let him outplay us. These hills are his hunting ground, but they're ours now too." The first trap. 2 days later, Harris led a recon patrol to one of the grid marks Mason had deciphered. The coordinates led them to a dried riverbed snaking between cliffs. Perfect ambush country. "Eyes up," Harris warned. "This smells wrong." They moved cautiously, boots crunching on gravel. Mason scanned the ridges through his scope. Nothing. No birds, no shepherds, no goats. Just silence. Then a glint caught his eye, a tripwire, thin as hair, strung across the path. He hissed a warning. The squad froze. Harris traced the wire to a cluster of rocks. Mason's stomach flipped. "Claymores. He's funneling us." "Backtrack." Harris barked. But even as they turned, the hillside erupted. Explosions thundered, rocks and dust raining down. Bullets cracked from above, precise, measured. Not the wild spray of Taliban fighters, this was disciplined, surgical. Ramirez dove behind a boulder, swearing. "This ain't goat herders. This is pro." Mason spotted the shooter for just a second. A lone figure in faded camo, face masked, rifle steady. His shot dropped Sergeant Cooper instantly, a perfect round through the chest. "Reaper!" Mason shouted. "We've got a Reaper on us." Fighting a shadow. Pinned in the riverbed, the squad fought to stay alive. The enemy sniper shifted positions with uncanny speed, firing from one ridge, then another as if there were 5 of him. Every shot forced them deeper into cover. Harris crawled to Mason. "Can you counter-snipe him?" Mason clenched his jaw. "I can try. But he's better." "Then make it count," Harris said. Mason steadied his rifle, scanning the ridges. He remembered the stories, the whispers about Reaper snipers who could hold their breath for minutes, who could wait days for one shot. He forced himself to be still. There, a flicker of movement, a silhouette shifting between rocks. Mason squeezed the trigger. The rifle barked, echo rolling across the valley. Silence followed. For a moment he thought he'd hit him. Then a voice crackled over their comms, distorted, mocking. "You shoot like a child." Every man froze. Someone was on their encrypted net. Someone who shouldn't be. The voice chuckled. "You want ghosts? Welcome to our graveyard." Then static. The escape. Harris knew they were outmatched. Smoke out. Break contact. They popped canisters, the riverbed filling with white haze. Under the cover, the squad scrambled back the way they came, dragging Cooper's body with them. The enemy sniper didn't press. No pursuit, no follow-up. Just silence, letting them crawl away battered but alive. When they finally staggered into Razorback, covered in dust and blood, Harris slammed his fist on the map table. "He played with us. He could have killed us all, but he let us walk." "Why?" Mason answered quietly, still shaken. "Because he's not just fighting. He's sending a message. He wants us to know the Reapers are still here." Cracks in the unit. The days after the ambush stretched Razorback thin. Men whispered about the sniper, the ghost on the ridge. Morale frayed. Every patrol came back spooked, convinced they were being watched. Ramirez finally snapped at dinner. "We're fighting a legend, Cap. You can't beat a damn ghost." Mason slammed his tray down. "He bleeds like anyone else. You just gotta catch him." Ramirez shot back. "And what if he catches us first?" You saw what he did to Cooper. Like swatting a fly." Harris cut them off sharply. "Enough. He's a man, not a myth. And men can be killed." But even his voice lacked conviction. The decoding breakthrough. That night, Mason returned to the notebooks, desperate. He traced the symbols again, connecting them to terrain features, old Soviet maps, sniper hide markers. Then it clicked. The grids weren't just caches. They were a route. A chain of positions stretching across the valley like stepping stones. A path only a Reaper would know. He grabbed Harris. "Sir, I think I found it. A network of safe houses, sniper nests, supply stashes. He's not just surviving, he's moving along this trail. That's how he stays ahead of us." Harris studied the map. The last mark was a ridgeline overlooking the valley floor, perfect high ground. "If that's where he's headed," Harris said slowly, "then that's where we'll set the trap." Setting the bait. 2 nights later, under cover of darkness, Razorback sent a decoy convoy down the valley road. Just 3 Humvees, lights dimmed, baiting the sniper. Meanwhile, Harris, Mason, Ramirez, and a team of sharpshooters climbed the opposite ridge, moving silently through the rocks. They set up with overlapping fields of fire, scanning the darkness. Hours passed. The convoy rumbled below, seemingly oblivious. Mason's eye never left his scope. Sweat trickled down his face. Then, there. A faint shift, barely a shadow against the ridge opposite. The glint of glass. "Got him," Mason whispered. The Reaper was watching the convoy, patient, waiting for the perfect shot. Mason steadied his crosshairs, heart hammering. "On my mark," Harris whispered. But before he could give it, the voice crackled over comms again. "You're learning. Good. But you're too slow." A shot cracked. One of the convoy Humvees erupted in flames. The decoy was compromised. "Contact!" Harris shouted. "Open fire." Gunfire roared across the ridges. But when the dust cleared, the sniper was gone. Again. Closing scene. Back at Razorback, frustration boiled over. Harris slammed his helmet onto the table. "We had him. We had him." Mason sat in silence, haunted. He replayed the shot in his head, the speed, the precision, the arrogance of that voice. Ramirez finally spoke, voice low. What if he's not just one man? What if more than one Reaper survived? No one answered. The idea hung heavy in the air. Outside, the mountains loomed like sentinels. Somewhere in those ridges, the ghost of a forgotten war stalked them, laughing at their efforts. And Mason knew in his gut, they weren't hunting him. He was hunting them. The night was alive with tension. Every soldier in Captain Elena Ramirez's platoon could feel it in their bones. The camp on the ridge was stripped down, essentials only, ready for a hasty move. Ammunition boxes lay stacked like bricks beside sandbag positions, heavy machine guns mounted on makeshift tripods. The men and women of the 19th Infantry knew what awaited them. The insurgents hadn't fled, they had regrouped. Intelligence painted a grim picture, at least 3 companies' worth of enemy fighters armed with mortars, technicals, and sheer desperation. For Ramirez's unit, it meant one thing: survive until reinforcements arrived. Colonel Mason stood in the command tent, arms crossed, a cigarette burning between his fingers, though he never took a drag. The ritual was his calm before chaos. He glanced at Ramirez, who leaned over the table with the map spread wide. They'll hit us tonight, Mason said flatly. Ramirez nodded. We've got fields of fire set up. Corporal Diaz has the .50s zeroed. Wallace's squad has the claymores wired. But if their numbers are what intel says, it's going to be close. Close, Mason muttered, his eyes lingering on the small insignia stitched on Ramirez's rucksack. The insignia of a sniper platoon long dissolved, the ghost jackals. His jaw tightened. This ridge will hold. Or none of us make it out. The first mortar. It began with a scream in the sky. Incoming, someone shouted, and the ridge erupted in thunder. The first mortar landed short, shaking dirt across helmets. The second crashed near the wire, shredding a Humvee with fire. Then came the third, dead center on an empty foxhole. Luck, nothing more. Positions. Positions. Ramirez bellowed. The soldiers dove into cover as red tracers lit the valley below. Hundreds of muzzle flashes sparked in the darkness. Machine guns roared from the ridge, answering the storm. Sergeant Wallace's squad was first to engage. His M24 spat fire into the treeline, cutting down silhouettes trying to crawl forward. Private Brooks fed the belt with steady hands, knuckles white. Keep him back. Don't let him near the wire. Wallace yelled, brass cascading like rain. Corporal Diaz's .50 cal hammered from its nest, tearing through enemy trucks. One technical exploded in a fireball, showering burning debris across the valley. The soldiers cheered briefly, before more trucks appeared from the east. They're flanking us. Ramirez shouted over the radio. Mason grabbed it from her, voice steady. Alpha team, swing left. Hold the ridgeline. Ramirez with me. Snipers return. Ramirez slung her rifle, heart pounding. The ridge shook with every mortar blast, every burst of enemy fire. She hadn't wanted this role, but the M24 strapped across her back felt alive tonight, as if it had been waiting. She crawled into a nest beside 2 terrified privates who were firing blindly into the dark. Shift. I've got this, she ordered, pushing them aside. She steadied her breath, found the rhythm. Through the scope, the battlefield became something else. Calm. Silent. Just lines, targets, angles. A squad of insurgents rushed low, dragging a recoilless rifle toward the ridge. Ramirez exhaled and fired. The gunner dropped. She cycled the bolt, another down. Again, another. 3 men in 3 seconds. The recoilless rifle lay abandoned. Damn, one private whispered wide-eyed. Ramirez ignored him, moving to the next threat. An enemy sniper muzzle flashed from the far rocks. Ramirez adjusted, fired, gone. She felt the cold weight of her old platoon in her hands, as if the ghost jackals had returned for one last fight. Breach at the wire. The insurgents didn't stop. Their sheer numbers pressed against the defenses, wave after wave. Grenades rattled the wire. Claymores detonated, shredding dozens, but more followed. They're cutting through. Wallace shouted over comms. Mason sprinted down the trench, barking orders. Second line. Fallback positions ready. Nobody breaks. Then came the explosion, a massive IED planted against the wire. The blast blew open a gap big enough for 20 men. Insurgents poured through, screaming with rifles raised. Wallace and his squad met them head-on. Bayonets flashed. Bullets tore. Wallace himself smashed one fighter with the butt of his rifle, pivoted, and dropped another with his sidearm. But the tide was overwhelming. Brooks screamed as he went down, clutching his leg. The line began to buckle. Ramirez! Mason roared. She was already moving. She slid into the trench, firing her sidearm at point blank. An insurgent lunged at her with a knife. She parried with her rifle barrel and drove her knee into his gut, dropping him cold. The fighting was hand-to-hand, brutal, chaotic. But inch by inch the Americans held. Diaz redirected the .50 cal toward the breach, mowing down the second wave. Finally, silence, broken only by the groans of the wounded. The cost of holding. By midnight, the ridge was littered with bodies. Smoke curled from burning trucks. The ground was black with craters. The Americans had held, but at a terrible price. Wallace sat in the dirt, hands covered in blood that wasn't his. Brooks was gone. So were 5 others. Ramirez moved among the wounded, her face stone, but her hands gentle as she tied tourniquets and whispered reassurances she didn't believe. Mason stood at the edge of the ridge, scanning the valley with binoculars. His face was grim. They're not done. They're regrouping. Sure enough, headlights glowed in the distance. More trucks. More men. The insurgents weren't retreating. They were preparing for another push. How much ammo we got left? Mason asked. Diaz spat dirt from his mouth. Enough for one more dance. After that, it's knives and fists. A choice in the dark. In the command tent, the surviving NCOs gathered. Tired eyes, dirty faces, resolve etched in sweat and blood. They'll hit us again before dawn, Ramirez said. We won't hold. Wallace slammed his fist into the table. Then we fight until the last man. I'll be damned if they take this ridge. Your men already paid enough, Mason growled. He looked at Ramirez, then at the insignia on her rucksack. You were ghost jackals once. You know what sacrifice means. But these kids, he broke off, jaw tight. We need another way. Silence. Then Ramirez spoke. A counterstrike. Mason frowned. Explain. They think we're cornered. But their command trucks, the ones coordinating these waves, they're in the valley. I can slip down, take them out. Without coordination, their assault falls apart. That's suicide, Wallace said. Maybe, Ramirez admitted. But it buys everyone else a chance. Mason stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. You won't go alone. Into the valley. The plan was madness, but it was all they had. Ramirez, Mason, and Diaz moved under the cover of darkness, slipping down the rear slope of the ridge. The valley was alive with enemy movement, convoys forming, men shouting in a dozen languages. They crawled through brush, silent, breath shallow. Every step was risk. Once, a patrol passed so close Ramirez could hear the rattle of rounds in their magazines. She froze, finger on the trigger, but Mason shook his head. Patience. Not yet. Finally they saw it, the command trucks, parked near a grove. Radios flickered. Officers gestured over maps lit by lantern light. Targets acquired, Diaz whispered. 2 minutes, Mason said. They moved like ghosts. Diaz planted C4 charges beneath the first truck. Ramirez steadied her M24, scope trained on the officers. Mason checked his watch. 1 minute. Sweat dripped down Ramirez's cheek. She breathed deep, recalling every lesson, every ghost of the jackals. Now. Ramirez fired. The first officer's head snapped back. Diaz detonated the charges. Fireballs consumed the trucks. Mason opened up with his rifle, cutting down panicked fighters. Chaos erupted. Fall back. Mason ordered. They sprinted into the dark as the valley burned, insurgents shouting in confusion. Dawn on the ridge. The counterstrike worked. Leaderless and disorganized, the insurgents' final assault faltered. By dawn, the ridge still stood, scarred, blackened, but unbroken. Helicopters thundered in, reinforcements pouring onto the ridge. Medics swarmed the wounded. Fresh soldiers replaced the exhausted. Colonel Mason stood at the edge of the ridge, watching the valley burn. He lit another cigarette, finally taking a drag. Ramirez sat beside her M24, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling from exhaustion. The insignia on her rucksack seemed to gleam faintly in the rising sun. You did it, Mason said quietly. No, Ramirez whispered. We did. All of us. She looked at the ridge, at the rows of bodies waiting for evacuation. Her chest ached. Victory tasted like ashes. Mason nodded. The ghost jackals would have been proud. Ramirez didn't answer. She just stared into the horizon, the silence heavy. The war wasn't over. It never was. But for now they had survived. And survival, she knew, was its own kind of legend. The end.